You've heard of haunted libraries, but have you ever heard of a press that pressed ghosts into paper? The Gollancz press, in the shadow of the Thames, once whispered secrets with every page it printed. It was a place where words came alive until the ink turned black and the stories began to haunt the hands that wrote them. You ever wonder what happens when a press stops printing and starts printing something else? The Gollancz press wasn't just a place, it was a living thing, a creature of ink and paper, with a heart that beat in rhythm with the words it birthed. But some words, once said, can never be unspoken. They say the press was cursed the night a famous author vanished, his last words scrawled across a page that no one could read. You ever wonder if the words were the curse or the curse was the words? Now, the Gollancz press sits silent, its machines rusted and its pages filled with whispers. But sometimes, when the wind howls through the rafters, you can hear it typing, typing, typing. Come, dear listener, let's walk through the halls of the Gollancz press together. What if the stories it printed weren't just stories at all? What if they were the last breaths of those who wrote them? You've heard the name Gollancz, but do you know where it began? It started in the heart of London in a modest shop that smelled of ink, paper, and ambition. A family of printers, the Gollancz family, built their legacy on words, one page at a time. The Gollancz press was more than just a business, it was a haven for writers, poets, and dreamers. They published everything from Shakespeare to Marx, and in between, they found room for the strange and the surreal. A place where the written word could breathe. But the Gollancz press had its share of secrets. Some say the first ghost to haunt the shop was a printer's apprentice, lost to the night in 1852. Others say it was the ghost of a lost manuscript, forever trapped between the pages of a book. And then came the war. The press was used to print propaganda, then to print the truth. The Gollancz family, once just printers, became something more. They were guardians of the written word, even in the darkest of times. By the time the war ended, the press had changed. It was no longer just a place to print books, it was a place to remember, to honor, to keep the stories alive, even when the world tried to silence them. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. The presses were running late, the ink was thick, and the air smelled like old paper and something else, something that made your skin crawl. The workers started whispering about the ghost of the last editor. He'd been obsessed with perfection, and now his name was etched into every page, even when no one was watching. The ink began to change color. Some pages turned a sickly green, others a deep, unnatural black. And the words started to move, like they had a life of their own. One morning, a new typeface appeared on the press. No one could tell where it came from, but it looked like it had been written by someone who'd been dead for decades. They found a journal in the basement, tucked beneath a floorboard. It was filled with frantic, half-finished notes. The last entry was dated the night the presses stopped working altogether. And then, the presses went silent. Not because of a break, not because of a fault, but because something had taken over. Something that had been waiting for the right moment to speak. You've heard the whispers of the Gollancz press, but what about the night it all changed? It was a quiet Thursday, the kind of evening where the air feels heavy with something more than just the weight of the ink. The last known sighting of Henry Gollancz, the publisher, was that night. He had gone to fetch a rare manuscript from a nearby archive, promising to return by midnight, but he never did. The manuscript was found days later, tucked inside a hollowed-out bookshelf, the pages filled with frantic, incoherent scribbles. It spoke of a hollowing, a slow, insidious erosion of the self, of the mind, of the soul. No one knew where Henry went, and no one ever found the manuscript source. It was as if he had simply vanished into the very pages he once filled with words. To this day, the Gollancz press remains quiet, its presses still, its stories unfinished. But sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear the echo of a voice, just on the edge of hearing, whispering, "I am becoming nothing." I remember the way the air would still, like the world had paused just to listen. The Gollancz press wasn't just a place, it was a presence, a whisper in the walls. One man swore he saw a figure in the printing room, just before the presses stopped cold. No one else saw it, but he kept the same pattern of scratches on the door every night. And then there was the librarian who vanished without a trace. Her desk remained untouched, her papers still in order, as if she'd simply stepped out for a moment. They say the press doesn't just print words, it prints memory. Some say it takes them and leaves only the silence in its wake. You can still feel it if you know where to look. The weight of history, the echo of something that won't let go. We began our investigation with the old Gollancz archives, where dust and forgotten names linger like ghosts. The air smelled of paper and time, and the silence was so thick it could have been a character in the story. One file in particular caught my eye, a letter from 1932, written in a shaky hand, warning of a hollowing that had begun in the press. The writer spoke of voices in the type, of pages that whispered when no one was listening. As we examined the machinery, we found strange marks on the type plate symbols that didn't match any known language. They seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light, like a heartbeat from the dead. One of the workers, an elderly man with a haunted look, told us of a night when the presses began to print on their own. The words were not in any known language, but they were filled with sorrow and longing. We left with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: the Gollancz press was not just a place of printing, but a place where the past refused to stay buried. You know, the thing that never gets solved is the one detail that haunts them all: the missing ink. The ink that vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and the scent of something old in the air. They say the presses were never the same after that night. The rhythm of the type, the weight of the paper, the sound of the hammer. Like the machine itself remembered something it shouldn't. You ever wonder what it feels like to be the last person to touch something that's never been explained? Like you're holding a secret that doesn't want to be told. The ink is gone, but the story isn't. And sometimes, the story is the only thing that stays. You've heard the tales of the Gollancz press, but what about the people who live near it now? Some say the old workers still whisper in the halls, and the scent of ink lingers in the air like a promise. The locals say the press is haunted by a man who tried to escape the factory but was never found. His ghost is said to haunt the night shifts, searching for a door that no longer exists. Some say the press itself is alive, a sentient machine that remembers every book it ever printed. It's said to whisper the names of its victims to those who listen closely enough. And then there are the stories of the children who played near the press. They say the press would call them by name, luring them in with the promise of stories and safety, but none ever return. You followed this story through the dust and the dark, through the echoes of a press that once printed the dreams of a nation. But what remains is not the paper, but the silence. What lingers is the question that no one dares ask. Some say the press still hums in the night, a low vibration beneath the floorboards, like a heartbeat waiting to be heard. Others claim the ghosts of the printers have not yet found their voices. And so we return to the question that haunts us all. What did the Gollancz press truly print? And why do we feel, sometimes, that it's still printing for us? The press may be silent now, but the questions it left behind are never truly gone. They linger, like the last words of a story that refuses to end. You've heard the whispers of the Gollancz press, and now you're left with the echo of its silence. What do you think lingers in the shadows of those old printing presses? Was it a ghost of the past, or a warning from the future? The press has long since stopped, but the weight of its stories remains. Sometimes, the most haunted places are the ones that seem the least touched by time. And sometimes, the silence is the loudest sound of all. So, as we turn the page to the next tale, remember this: the past is never truly gone. It just waits in the quiet places, ready to speak again. You've heard of the Bly House, haven't you? That place in Oregon, where the wind whispers secrets through the trees and the silence feels too heavy to lift. It's not just a house, it's a memory, a place where the past refuses to stay buried. Some say the air here smells like old wood and something else, something faint, like a scream that never quite left. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dove smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The Bly House was once a place of love and laughter, but now it's a place where the echoes of a tragic past linger. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what it was like to stand there, just outside the gates? Today, we're not just visiting this place, we're stepping into its history. We'll follow the whispers, the footsteps, and the unanswered questions that still haunt its halls. So, dear listener, let's go inside. Let's listen for the forgotten screams that still echo through the Bly House and see if we can finally understand what happened there. You know, the Bly House wasn't always a place of whispers and shadows. It started as a grand Victorian estate, built in the late 1800s for a wealthy Boston family. It was all about status, pride, and a little bit of madness. The original owners, the Bly family, were known for their opulence and eccentricities. They hosted lavish parties, and their mansion became a local legend for its grandeur and, well, its secrets. But behind the gilded doors, the Bly family's lives were anything but picture perfect. There were rumors of hidden rooms, secret letters, and a tragedy that would change the house forever. The real story of the Bly House began with a young girl named Laura, who was believed to have been locked in a room by her father. The whispers of her screams became the first ghostly echo the house would carry for decades. And so, the Bly House became more than just a house. It became a place where the past refused to stay buried and where the echoes of the past would never fade. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. It was a quiet Sunday. The house was still, and the air felt thick with something you couldn't name. The silence was too loud, like the walls were holding their breath. Then came the whispers. Not loud, just a low murmur, like someone was speaking just beyond the edge of hearing. You turned your head, but there was no one there. The sound followed you, like a shadow you couldn't shake. You tried to ignore it. You told yourself it was just the wind or the house settling. But then the temperature dropped. Not just a little, but enough to make your breath visible in the air, even in the middle of the day. And then there were the sounds. Not footsteps, not voices, but something deeper. A child's cry, echoing from the walls, not the floor. You could feel it in your bones, like the house was remembering something it should have forgotten. You remember the whispers in the halls, don't you? But what if the real scream came from the walls themselves? It was a night like any other, but the clock struck midnight, and the house held its breath. The children had been warned, but the mother had her doubts. She left the door ajar, hoping the house would sleep again, but the silence was too heavy, too still for a house that had never known peace. She called out, but the house never answered. The walls seemed to close in, and the floorboards groaned like they were alive. It was then she heard it sound like a child's voice, but not from the children. She ran, but the house had other plans. The door slammed shut behind her, and the stairs twisted into something else. The scream came next, but it was not hers, it was the house, remembering. No one ever found her. The house was abandoned and the children left behind, but the whispers never stopped. They say the walls still remember, and the screams still echo in the dark. I met a woman in the 1970s who said she saw the Bly house from her childhood home, a gray silhouette against a blood-red sunset, like a ghost standing in the sky. She claimed the windows glowed like lanterns, and the trees around it swayed without wind, as if the house itself were breathing. One man told me he heard the children's laughter from the woods echoing like a lullaby, but when he looked, there was only silence and the scent of burnt sugar in the air. Another said he saw a figure in the garden, a girl in a white dress, but when he ran to her, she vanished like smoke in the wind. The most chilling account was from a woman who claimed she heard a child's voice calling her name, but when she turned, she saw only the empty house, its windows dark and lifeless. These stories, though fragmented, form a tapestry of fear and longing, a reminder that some places hold memories we cannot escape. We began our investigation with a simple question: what if the Bly house wasn't just haunted, but remembered? The records were sparse, but the rumors were thick. The first clue came from a dusty ledger in the library: names, dates, and a list of people who vanished without a trace. Not all were missing, but they were all last seen in the house. The most chilling entry was from 1934, a woman named Eliza Hart, who was last seen walking the halls, whispering to the walls. Her body was never found. As we dug deeper, we found that Eliza's story wasn't just a ghost story, it was a real-life disappearance. The police had given up, but the house never did. One night, during a seance, the house itself seemed to respond. A low, distant scream echoed through the walls, as if the house was finally trying to speak. It was as if the house had been waiting for us to listen. And now, it had something to say, though we weren't sure if it was a warning or a lament. You ever notice how some stories just stop? Like the Bly house, where the last scream was never heard and the last whisper was never answered. It's like the house forgot to breathe. No one knows what happened to the last visitor who vanished in 1929. Not the police, not the press, not even the house itself. It's like the house decided to swallow the truth whole. The house has its own language, and it speaks in riddles. The last scream? It's still out there, somewhere between the walls, waiting for someone to listen. So, what do you think? Was the scream lost, or was it waiting for someone to finally hear it? The Bly house isn't done yet, and neither am I. You've heard the stories, but let me tell you what the locals still whisper. They say the Bly house isn't just haunted, it's cursed. Some say the children never left, that they're trapped in the walls, still screaming for help. There's a theory that the house was built on an ancient burial ground, and the spirits of the buried still cry out beneath the floors. Others say the original owner, Dr. Bly, performed dark rituals to bind the souls of his children to the home. Some say the house is a prison, and the screaming is the sound of the children trapped inside, trying to reach us through the walls. Others believe the house itself is alive, a sentient force that feeds on fear and memory. Even today, the townsfolk avoid the house on certain nights. They say if you listen closely, you can hear the echoes of laughter, then the sudden silence, and then just before dawn the sound of a child's voice calling for help. And if you're ever curious, I suggest you ask the local bartender. He's the only one who'll tell you the truth. But be careful, some say he's the one who still hears the screams, and he's not sure if he's awake or dreaming. Even now, decades later, the Bly house still holds its secrets close. No one knows exactly what happened that night in 1919, and the silence is louder than any scream. Theories swirl like the wind through the halls. Some say it was a tragedy, others a tragedy with a twist. But no one has ever been able to piece the truth together. And so, the house remains a silent witness to history, its story unfinished. It's not just a place, it's a question waiting to be answered. Perhaps one day, the truth will be found. Or maybe it's better left to the imagination and the whispers that still echo through the halls. You know, sometimes the most terrifying silence is the one that follows a scream. What do you think lingered in the Bly house after the last cry was heard? The walls didn't just remember the past, they held onto it, like an old quilt that's been stitched with secrets. And yet, the Bly house isn't done whispering. What do you think it wants to tell us now, after all these years? Maybe the screams weren't just from the past. Maybe they're still here, waiting for someone to listen. Stay with me. There's another story waiting just around the corner and a little darker. You've heard of Edinburgh, but have you ever wondered what lies just beyond the city's edge? A place where time seems to stand still, and the wind carries more than just autumn leaves. This is Castle Sinclair Irvine, a fortress of stone and secrets, perched high on a hill, where the echoes of the past still linger in the stones. Its history is as rich as it is dark. Built in the 15th century, it has witnessed battles, betrayals, and the rise and fall of powerful clans. But it's not just the architecture that haunts, it's the whispers that drift through the halls, the footsteps that echo when no one is there, and the feeling that someone is always watching. People say the castle is cursed, that the spirits of those who died here still wander the corridors, and that the walls themselves seem to murmur secrets to those who listen closely. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. So, what do you think? Is it the wind, or something far more sinister that gives this place its eerie reputation? You know, the castle wasn't built in a day, and neither was the legend. It started in 1595 when a man named Sir James Stuart, a proud and ambitious baron, decided to make a statement with stone and steel. He built it to honor his family, but also to show the crown he wasn't afraid of their power. The castle was more than a home, it was a symbol of defiance, pride, and a touch of arrogance. But then came the tragedy. Sir James was killed in a mysterious skirmish, and his wife, Lady Margaret, was left to rule. Some say her grief turned the castle into a prison for the souls of those who had died there. The whispers grew louder and the stories darker. Some say the castle now remembers the ones it took, and that the walls are still listening for the names of those who are lost. You remember the first time you heard it, didn't you? A faint, whispering sound, like someone was calling your name from the walls. It came from the East Wing, where the stones are older than the city itself. It wasn't loud, just a whisper, but it felt like it was meant for you alone. You turned, but there was no one there. The silence that followed was louder than the sound. You tried to convince yourself it was the wind or the old pipes creaking, but the whispers came again, and this time they were louder. It felt like someone was trying to tell you something. You started to notice the other things too, the cold spots in the hallway, the way the dust on the floor seemed to shift when no one was there. It was like the castle was watching you. You began to wonder if the castle was trying to warn you, or maybe it was trying to tell you something you weren't ready to hear. And that's when you realized it wasn't just the castle, it was the past. You know, the castle was once a place of grandeur, but now it's all quiet, save for the wind and the whispering walls. One night, a young woman vanished without a sound, just like that. Her name was Margaret, and she was the last of her family to live there. The last time anyone saw her, she was walking through the gardens humming a tune under the moon. No one could find her body, and no one could explain what happened. Some say she was taken by the castle itself, others say she was never there at all. The whispers grew louder after that. They said her voice could be heard at night, singing songs only she knew, but no one dared to go near the gardens after dark. Even now, some say you can still hear her if you listen closely, if you're brave enough to step into the castle and let the silence speak. I spoke to a retired historian who swore he heard the castle weep in the night, a sound like old bones cracking in a damp cellar. He said it came from the East Wing, where the walls are thick with stories. Another woman, a local ghost hunter, told me she once felt the castle watching her. She said the silence was so thick it pressed against her skin like the weight of centuries. One caretaker described the walls as screaming in a language no one understands. He said the sound came at midnight, rising and falling like a slow, mournful dirge. There's a man who claims the castle's ghosts are not just of the past but of the present, haunting those who dare to stay too long, whispering secrets they were never meant to know. Some say the castle remembers, and if you listen closely, it might remember you too. The team arrived at Castle Sinclair Irvine with a mix of anticipation and nerves, each step echoing like a heartbeat through the centuries-old stone. We were here to uncover the truth, but the silence was louder than any explanation. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old wood, as if the castle itself was breathing. We moved carefully, as though the walls might hear us and decide to speak. What we found wasn't just physical evidence, it was the feeling of being watched, of footsteps trailing behind us when we were alone. The castle was alive, and it had a story to tell. The deeper we went, the more the castle seemed to resist us. Doors that wouldn't open, voices that whispered in the dark, and a sense that we were not the first to search for answers here. By the time we left, we didn't have answers, but we had something far more unsettling, a sense that the castle wasn't done with us, and that it never will be. You see it now, don't you? That one detail, the one that's never been explained, the one that lingers like a half-remembered dream, just out of reach. It's not the whispers, not the footsteps, not the cold spots. It's something smaller, something you almost feel more than you see. No one can say what it is. Some say it's a message, others say it's a warning, but no one dares to write it down. Not again. And that, my dear, is why we never stop looking. Because sometimes the truth is just a whisper away and it's waiting for you to listen. You've heard the tales, but let me tell you what the locals still whisper. Some say a castle is haunted by a woman, others by a child, but most agree it's a ghost that watches. What do you think it's waiting for? There's a legend of a young bride who vanished in the 1700s, and her spirit is said to wander the halls, searching for her lost love. You can still hear her voice, faint but clear, echoing through the stone. There's also the tale of a child who disappeared during a storm, and their laughter is still heard in the night. They say if you listen closely, you can hear them playing in the garden, just out of reach. Theories abound, but no one knows for sure. Some say the castle is a museum of the past, while others believe it's a place where the dead are still learning to let go. What do you think the castle is trying to tell us? You know, sometimes the truth is more terrifying than the ghost. The case of Lady Irvine remains unsolved, with no body ever found, no suspects ever caught. It's like the castle itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. The last letter she wrote was never delivered. It was found sealed in an envelope with no address. The handwriting was frantic, the ink smudged like she had been writing it in a panic, and yet no one knows where it was meant to go. To this day, the castle is still whispered about in the old Scottish towns. Some say the wind carries her voice, a lonely echo that only the most sensitive ears can hear. Others say it's the castle itself, trying to protect its secrets. And so, the mystery lingers, like the last note of a haunting melody. You wonder, do the walls still remember? Do they still wait for someone to finally listen to the whispers and find out what really happened to Lady Irvine? You've heard the stories, felt the chill, and now you're left wondering what if the castle isn't just haunted, but waiting. Like a lullaby sung by the wind, it lingers, soft and insistent as if it knows you're listening. Sometimes, the most terrifying things are the ones that don't speak at all. A silence that stretches too long, a door that creaks without wind, a shadow that moves when you're certain no one's there. I think the castle is trying to tell us something, not in words, but in the way the stones remember, in the way the air holds its breath. It's not just haunted, it's alive, and it's watching. So, as you leave this tale behind, take a moment to listen. Not for the screams, but for the whisper. Sometimes, the quietest voices are the loudest. And remember, the castle doesn't just haunt the past, it waits for the next listener. Until then, stay warm, stay curious, and never let the silence go unanswered. You've heard of Edinburgh, of course, but have you ever wondered what lies behind its stately facades? The castle Sinclair Irvine, tucked away in the hills, whispers secrets only the wind dares to carry. Built in the 1500s, this castle was once a stronghold of the powerful Sinclair clan. Now it's abandoned, its grand halls echoing with the ghosts of the past, and its corridors filled with a silence that feels too heavy. The locals say the walls still remember the laughter and the sorrow that once filled them. Some claim to hear voices at night, a child's cry or a woman's sigh, echoing through the empty rooms. But what really haunts this place isn't just the ghosts, it's the history, the blood, the betrayal, the secrets buried beneath centuries of stone. You can almost feel the weight of it pressing against the walls. So, if you're ever in the area, I'd say you should tread carefully. Because the castle Sinclair Irvine isn't just a ruin, it's a keeper of stories, and it's not done telling them yet. So, back in the 1600s, this place was built by a man named Sir Alexander Gordon. A noble, yes, but also a man with a dark past. You ever heard of the Gordon riots? Well, he was part of that, and that's where things started to go sideways. He built this castle as a symbol of power, but also as a place to hide his secrets. You know, the kind of secrets that can make a man lose his head. And in those days, that was a real thing. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Then came the Jacobite uprisings. The castle was a key holding point, and the fighting was brutal. You can still find traces of the battles in the stone cracks, scorched marks, even a few bloodstains that refused to fade. After the wars, the castle fell into disrepair. The last family to live there vanished without a trace. Some say they were taken by the castle itself. Others say they were killed in a secret chamber that's still hidden beneath the floorboards. And so, the castle became a place of ghosts. Not just the echoes of the past, but something more. Something that still waits, still listens, still whispers. You can hear it if you listen closely enough. You might not have noticed it at first, but the air in the castle had taken on a strange stillness, like the world had paused just long enough for a ghost to step into the frame. The servants began to whisper about the cold spots, the way the candles would flicker without reason, and how certain rooms felt too heavy to enter. The first real sign came when the cook found a note in the butter churn, written in a hand that wasn't hers, telling her to leave the castle before the walls closed in. And then there was the sound, a child's laughter, high and clear, coming from the east wing, where no child had ever been allowed to play. It was subtle, but you could feel it. The castle was watching, waiting, and the walls were no longer just walls. You see it now, don't you? That one moment, that one sound, that one breath held in the dark. It's like the castle itself is whispering your name, just out of reach. There's a reason the keep was abandoned. It's not just the cold, or the damp, or the way the wind screams through the cracks. It's something else, something that lingers, something that waits. The last person to be seen in the castle was a young woman, just 22, with a smile that couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. She said she heard voices, not just in the walls, but in her own mind. They found her journal, hidden in the floorboards. It's filled with questions, with confessions, with a desperation that makes your heart ache. She never wrote her name, only a single word, help. No one knows what happened to her. Not the police, not the historians, not even the ghost. But the castle still whispers, and the wind still carries her voice through the stone. You hear it too, don't you? I've spoken with several locals who insist they've heard the whispering walls themselves. One woman, a retired librarian, claims she's heard a voice calling her name late at night, only to find the castle empty when she arrives. Another man, a former tour guide, told me he once felt the cold breath of something unseen during a tour, and the group suddenly stopped mid-sentence, all eyes fixed on the same spot in the wall. One of the most chilling accounts came from a young woman who said she was staying in a nearby cottage and heard the castle's whispers growing louder each night until she had to leave. She described the voices as low and melodic, but with a strange edge, like they were trying to say something but couldn't quite get the words out. These accounts, though varied, all point to a deep sense of unease that lingers in the castle's stones, as if the past is still trying to make itself heard. We began with the old records, you know, those brittle pages filled with ink and whispers of the past. The first thing we found was a list of names, some familiar, some long forgotten, each tied to a peculiar fate. One name stood out, a woman named Isabel, who vanished without a trace in 1947. The records didn't explain much, just a note saying she was last seen near the eastern wall. As we combed through the archives, we uncovered a strange pattern, several other disappearances, all linked to the same section of the castle. No bodies, no clear answers, just echoes of lives that once were. The deeper we dug, the more we found. Letters, diary entries, and even a few faint sketches of the same shadowy figure lurking near the wall, always at night. It was all very quiet, very still, and very strange. The castle had a way of keeping its secrets, but it also had a way of making you feel like you were being watched. You know, the real mystery isn't the ghosts or the whispers. It's this one thing that's never been explained. Every time someone goes into the west wing, they hear the same sound, a soft metallic clink like a key turning in a lock. But no one can find the door. Some say it's a trick of the acoustics, but the sound always comes from the same spot. Others think it's a hidden room, but the walls are solid stone. The only thing that's certain is that no one has ever found the source of that sound, and no one ever will. It's like the castle itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally uncover what's been locked away for centuries, and what it might be willing to do to keep it that way. So, do you think it's a ghost with a key, or just a trick of the light? I'll tell you this, if you ever find that door, you won't be the same person who came looking for it. You've heard the stories, but what about the ones that never make it to the papers? The ones that are passed down like heirlooms, wrapped in layers of doubt and hope. Some say the castle listens, and others say it's just the wind. There's a tale about a young bride who vanished on her wedding night, and the walls have been whispering her name ever since. Some say she's still there, trapped in the stone. There's even a legend that the castle was once used for something darker than you can imagine. Some say it was a place of witchcraft, others say it was a prison for the wicked. All I know is the walls still hum. you can't help but wonder, what if the whispers are just the voices of people who never left? What if the castle is still waiting for someone to listen? You've heard the stories, but what about the silence that follows? No one knows for sure what happened that night in 1967. Some say it was a lover's quarrel, others whisper of a darker truth. But the truth, my dear, has yet to speak. The body was never found. The police called it an accident, but the family never let go. They say the house still remembers. They say it still waits for someone to ask the right question. Today, the house stands empty, its windows boarded, its doors sealed. But sometimes, in the hush of an overcast morning, you can still hear it. A whisper, a sigh, a voice that doesn't belong to this world. And so, the mystery lingers. Not because it's unsolved, but because it's waiting. Waiting for someone to come back, to ask again, to listen one more time. What will you do when the walls begin to speak? You know, sometimes the most chilling stories are the ones that fade into silence. The whispering walls of Castle Sinclair Irvine may have their own secrets, but they've also taught us that not all ghosts are loud. What if the real mystery is the one we never hear? There's a kind of poetry in the way the wind moves through those ancient stones. It carries the weight of time, the echoes of those who walked before us. And sometimes it carries a voice we're not meant to understand. As we turn the page, remember, the past isn't always buried. Sometimes it just waits, and sometimes it whispers. Now I'm going to leave you with a question. Have you ever heard a whisper that didn't belong to anyone? And if so, did you ever wonder who it was trying to reach? You've heard of the Stanley Hotel, haven't you? That grand old castle in the Rockies where the snows are heavy and the silence is thick. But let me tell you, it's not just the architecture that makes it special, it's the stories. Back in the 1920s, it was the talk of the town, a place where the rich and famous came to escape the world. But there was something about that hotel that always felt off, like it had a secret it wasn't willing to share. You've heard the stories, of course. The whispers in a hallway, the strange lights, the way the room seems to hum with a presence that's not quite there. But what really makes room 237 tick? That's what we're here to find out. So, let's take a walk through the halls of this forgotten room and see what secrets it's been keeping for over a century. But remember, once you step inside, you might not be able to leave. Are you ready to hear the story of room 237? And are you ready to wonder if it's still waiting for someone to come back and stay? You know, the Stanley Hotel wasn't always a place of haunted whispers. Back in 1909, it was a grand, gleaming beacon of progress built by the visionary Henry Stanley, who had a thing for bold ideas and even bolder architecture. The hotel was meant to be a symbol of the American dream, a place where dreams could be made and where the rich and the weary alike could find a home. But even the grandest of dreams can have their roots in something darker, like the old hotel that once stood on this very site, which burned down in 1886, leaving behind a smoldering ghost of its former self. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Henry Stanley didn't just build a hotel, he built an empire, and in doing so, he made enemies. Some say he had a hand in more than just construction. The Stanley Hotel was more than just a place to stay. It was a place to remember and to forget. And some things, once remembered, refuse to be forgotten. You know how sometimes, in the middle of the night, you hear a creak that isn't yours? Well, that's exactly what happened in room 237. The floorboards groaned like a tired old man, and I swear, it sounded like someone was walking across them. The next morning, the staff found a trail of footprints in the dust, leading straight to the door. They were perfectly formed, as if someone had stepped in the same spot over and over, almost like they were trying to get out. The staff said they checked the room thoroughly. No one had been there. No luggage, no signs of a struggle. Just those footprints, like a ghost had been trying to leave a message. And it wasn't just one ghost. It was a whole chorus. Now, I'm not one to believe in ghosts for ghosts' sake. But if you've ever been in a place where the air feels heavy and the silence is too loud, you know that something is trying to tell you something. And sometimes, it's not just a story. You remember the room, don't you? The one where the walls seemed to breathe. The one where the mirrors didn't just reflect, they whispered. And then silence. A silence so deep it felt like the house had swallowed the sound. It wasn't just the silence. It was the absence of something. A presence that had been there and then wasn't. Like the room had been stripped of its soul, left hollow and waiting. Then came the report. A man, a guest, claimed he heard a voice low, urgent, and familiar. A voice that said, "You don't belong here." And then nothing. No one could find him. The hotel had no record of him ever staying. Just a room, and a mystery. The room was closed off, sealed away, and never opened again. But sometimes, in the quietest moments, the echoes return. A whisper. A step. A door creaking open but no one there. You wonder, don't you, what happened in that room? What did he find? And why, when he left, the room was never the same again? That's the Stanley Hotel's room 237, and if you listen closely you might still hear it. In the echo of a whisper, in the creak of a door, in the silence where a voice once was. I remember the first time I heard the story of room 237. A friend, a retired librarian, said it was the only room in the hotel that never got cleaned. It was always just there, waiting. Then there was the woman who said she saw a man in a tuxedo standing in the doorway, watching her. She said he never moved, just stood there, like he was waiting for something. There's even a claim that the room has its own voice. One guest said she could hear it whispering her name at night, like it was trying to get her to stay. And the strangest part? Some say the room never really existed, that it was just a number on the wall, waiting for the right person to find it. So, have you ever stayed in a room that felt too real? I'd love to hear your stories. We followed the trail of whispers to the old hotel's archives where dust motes danced in the beams of a single overhead light. The scent of aged paper and something older lingered in the air. There, we found the original blueprints crisp yet yellowed, with faint ink stains and a strange, recurring symbol in the corner of every room. It looked like a hand, but not quite. We also found a faded photo of the hotel's original architect, with a note in the margin that read, "The hand is not mine." It was signed in a shaky, hurried script. The deeper we dug, the more we realized the hotel itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the right moment to speak. And we were getting closer. You know, the thing that's always bugged me is that no one really knows what happened in room 237 on that night in 1980. Was it a prank gone wrong? A nervous breakdown? Or something else entirely? The hotel staff claims they heard nothing, saw nothing, and didn't even know someone was in the room. But the guests? They swear they saw a figure in the hallway or a door that wasn't there. No security footage, no witness statements, just a room that somehow became a legend before anyone even remembered what happened inside it. And that's the one thing that still haunts me. Why did no one ever come forward with the truth? Was it fear, shame, or something even darker? Maybe room 237 wasn't just haunted. Maybe it was hiding something that should have stayed in the dark. You've heard the stories about room 237. But what about the ones that never make it to the news? Some say the hotel's old caretaker, Mr. Haskins, used to whisper to the walls at night. He claimed he could hear the spirits of the guests who had died in the room, asking for their names. Others believe the room's true horror comes not from the supernatural, but from the real-life tragedy that happened there. One guest, a young couple, vanished without a trace in the 1970s, and no one has ever found their belongings. Not even the hotel's staff. And then there are the theories. Some say the room is haunted by the spirit of the hotel's original owner, who died in a fire that never happened. Others think it's a cursed space where the echoes of the past refuse to be silenced. You might think these stories are just tall tales, but if you ask the locals, they'll tell you that room 237 has a way of making people remember things they shouldn't. And sometimes, the past doesn't stay buried. You know, sometimes the hardest part of a mystery isn't the ghost, it's the silence. The absence of a voice, the lack of a name, the way time just swallows the story whole. There are no official records of a body ever being found in that room. No fingerprints, no footprints, just the echo of a voice that vanished with the dawn. We're told the truth is out there, waiting for someone to find it. But sometimes, the truth is just too quiet to hear. And so, the story lingers. Not in the way of a tale told over firelight, but in the way of a name that fades, a door that remains slightly ajar, and a room that still waits. Perhaps the mystery is not meant to be solved. Maybe it's meant to remind us that some stories are best left to echo in the dark. You've heard the whispers of room 237, but have you ever wondered what it's like to stay in a place where the past refuses to let go? Sometimes, the most haunting stories are the ones that linger in the silence between the screams. I sometimes think the hotel itself is the true ghost waiting, watching, remembering. It's not just the rooms that hold secrets, but the moments between them, the spaces where the echoes of fear still live. But before we move on, I wonder what if the real mystery isn't in the room, but in the silence that follows? What if the hotel never truly lets you go? So, I'll leave you with this. The Stanley Hotel isn't just a place, it's a memory that refuses to end. And sometimes, the most terrifying stories are the ones that never close their eyes. You've heard of Edinburgh's castle, but have you ever heard of St. Clair Irvine? It's a place that's been called the Wailing Walls, and not just because of the wind. Legend says that if you stand in the Great Hall at night, you can hear the voices of the dead women wailing, children crying, and a man shouting for help. Some say the castle is haunted by a noblewoman who died in a scandal. Others say it's the spirit of a child who never made it out of the tower. but one thing is certain, it's not empty. If you listen closely, you might just hear the walls themselves weeping like a mother who's lost everything and can't let go. Sinclair Irvine isn't just a castle, it's a story that won't let go, and it's waiting for someone to listen. You've heard the whispers of the castle, but let me tell you how it all started. Back in 1593, a man named Sir Alexander Sinclair built this place with a vision of power and prestige. He wanted a fortress that would stand the test of time, but what he didn't know was that the land itself would play a role in its haunting. Sir Alexander wasn't just a nobleman, he was also a cunning strategist. He married into the powerful Stuart family, and that union brought both wealth and a legacy of political intrigue. But with power came secrets, and some of those secrets would haunt the castle long after he was gone. The first recorded ghost was a young woman named Margaret who died in the castle's east wing. She was the daughter of Sir Alexander's second wife, and she was said to have drowned in the well, though the truth is still debated. Some say she was murdered, others claim she died by suicide. Either way, her spirit has never left. The castle's history is as complicated as its walls. Over the centuries, it changed hands, was damaged in wars, and even stood empty for long stretches. But no matter what happened, the spirit of Margaret and those who came after her seemed to linger, always waiting for someone to listen. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And so, the castle became more than a home, it became a prison for the past. The walls, once built to protect, now echoed with voices from another time. The history of Castle Sinclair Irvine is not just about stone and mortar, but about the lives that were lived and the secrets that were buried beneath them. You remember the first time you heard the wails, don't you? A sound so deep, it felt like the earth itself was crying. It came from the walls, not the sky, and it didn't stop when the wind changed direction. The neighbors laughed it off at first, calling it a trick of the wind, but the sound didn't fade, it grew louder, more insistent, like a mother's cry for her lost child. The wails started at night, but soon they crept into the day. Some said they could hear them in the silence of morning, like a ghost trying to be heard over the noise of the living. Even the local historians, who once dismissed the stories as folklore, began to hesitate. They started asking questions about the castle's past, about the people who had lived and died there, about the ones who had been buried in the earth beneath our feet. And then, one night, the wails stopped. Or maybe they just became louder. You'll have to wait to find out what came next. You remember the whispers, don't you? The ones that drifted through the stone like ghosts in the wind. But now, the silence is louder, heavier, pressing against your ears like a hand on your shoulder. One night, in the autumn of 1793, a young woman named Margaret went missing. The last anyone saw of her was her own hand in the cold, wet earth, and the sound of her voice, faint but clear, calling out from the dark. They found her body days later, half buried in the garden, her dress torn and her face frozen in a look of terror. The police called it a tragedy, but the villagers whispered of something far older, far more cruel. No one ever solved it. No one ever found the killer. And to this day, when the wind howls through the stones, the echoes of Margaret's voice still rise just before the walls begin to weep. I've heard from a few retired teachers who once walked these halls. They swear the walls don't just echo, they sing. Hello, mournful wail, like a child's cry in the night. One man described it as a sound that follows you, no matter how fast you run. It's not just a whisper, it's a voice, pleading, or maybe just saying your name. Some claim the wails are strongest during the full moon. Others say they only come when the wind is just right, or when someone is alone in the upper halls. One woman told me she once heard the sound while reading a book in the library. She turned around, and the room was empty except for the sound, which grew louder and louder until it was right behind her. No one knows for sure what causes the wails, but they're real, felt, heard, and remembered, and they've haunted this place for generations. We started with the walls, you see, the ones that have been standing for centuries, whispering secrets in the dark. We ran our fingers along the stone, trying to feel the pulse of the place. Then we found the old cellar door, half buried in ivy. It creaked when we touched it, like it had been waiting for someone to remember it existed. The air down there was thick, almost suffocating, and it smelled like damp earth and something older, something forgotten. We found old letters tucked behind a loose brick, written in a shaky hand. They spoke of a woman who vanished in the 1800s and how her husband never stopped searching for her. The letters didn't say she was a ghost, but they did say she was never found and that her husband ended up disappearing too, just like she did. And then, just as we were about to leave, the walls started to hum. A low, steady sound, like the wind in the bones of the castle, like the voice of someone calling from the deep. You see it now, don't you? That one detail no one can explain it. The way the wind whispers through the stones, but it's not the wind. It's something else, something old, something watching. It's not just the sound, it's the way the light catches on the wall, like it's not just reflecting, but remembering. Like the wall is holding its breath. No one can say for sure what it is, just that it's there, and that it's waiting. For what? No one knows, but it's always there. The one detail that has never been explained. The one thing that makes this place feel like it's not just haunted, it's alive. And that's the thing, isn't it? The thing that lingers. The thing that makes you wonder if it's ever really gone. That's the one detail. That's the thing that never gets explained. And that's why we keep coming back. Some say the wails come from a lost love, a woman who once waited in the shadow of these walls for a man who never returned. Others claim it's the ghost of a child trapped between the stones, never allowed to move on. The local elders whisper that the castle was built on the bones of an ancient forest, and the earth remembers. Some say the wind carries the voices of the trees, singing lullabies to the restless dead. There are those who believe the wails are not of the dead, but of the living, those who still wait, who still love, and who are trapped in time, just like the castle itself. And then there are those who say the castle isn't haunted at all. They say it's just the wind, the old stones, and the stories people tell to keep the dark alive. But if you listen closely, you might just hear something else, a whisper, a wail, or maybe just the sound of history waiting to be heard. You know, sometimes the most chilling thing about a haunting isn't the ghost, it's the silence that follows. No one's ever solved the mystery of the wailing walls, and that's what makes it feel like it's still watching. The walls still whisper, but no one dares to listen. They say the voices are there, just waiting for someone brave enough to step into the dark and ask the right questions. We've asked all the questions we can, but the castle has its own secrets. And sometimes, the truth is too heavy to carry, especially when it's been buried for centuries. So here we are, still waiting for the voices to speak. Maybe one day, someone will listen. Or maybe the castle will finally decide it's time to say goodbye. And until then, the walls will keep their secrets. Because some places don't forget, and some stories aren't meant to end. As we leave the walls of Castle Sinclair Irvine, I can't help but think, what if the echoes we heard were not just echoes, but whispers from a time we've yet to understand? The castle may have stood for centuries, but some places hold secrets that time can't quite bury. And some voices, they don't just fade. Maybe the castle isn't just haunted, it's remembering. And sometimes, remembering is the scariest thing of all. But don't worry, dear listener, we'll be back soon. With another tale, another whisper, another reason to stay warm by the fire. You've heard of the bloop sound, haven't you? That low, haunting hum that comes from the deep, like a whale's moan, but with a secret. It's not just the sound, it's the way the water seems to breathe, as if it's alive and waiting. Locals say it's not just a sound, it's a message. And then there are the disappearances, people who went out to sea and never came back, not a trace of their boats, not a whisper of their voices. So now, as we sit by the fire, I wonder, what do you think the bloop is really trying to tell us? Is it a cry for help, a warning, or something far more sinister? You know, the bloop sound wasn't always a mystery, it was once a place of industry, a bustling hub of fishing and trade. The men who worked there were tough, but they had families and they had stories. But then came the cold, the silence, and the strange noises that echoed through the empty halls of the old cannery. The workers started to vanish one by one, and no one knew why. The locals called it the bloop sound for a reason. It was a place where the sea seemed to breathe, and where the past refused to stay buried. The men who left never came back. So, as you sit there, I wonder, do you think the sound is still calling? Or is it just the wind, carrying with it the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions? You remember the first time you heard that sound, didn't you? A low, droning hum like a distant engine, but no one was anywhere near the water. It was as if the ocean itself had begun to breathe. Then came the lights. Not the kind you see from a passing boat, but a soft, pale glow that floated just above the surface, like lanterns carried by invisible hands. It was beautiful, but it felt wrong, like a ghost trying to be seen. The next morning, the fishermen said they saw things they couldn't explain. A shadow moving just below the water, too large to be a whale. And then, the radio crackled with a voice that wasn't theirs, saying, "We're still here." Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. It wasn't just the sound or the light. It was the silence that followed. The way the waves would pause, as if listening. And the way the wind would stop, as if holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, the disappearances. One by one. No bodies, no signs. Just the sound, the light, and the feeling that something had begun to stir beneath the waves. Something that had been waiting for a long, long time. You remember how the sound started, don't you? A low, mournful hum, like the wind had learned to weep. It came from the water, but it felt like it was inside your bones. Then came the lights. Not the kind you see on the water, but something deeper, like the ocean itself had opened its eyes. They flickered, like a ghost trying to be seen. He never returned, not after that night. The Coast Guard found his boat empty and drifting as if it had been pulled by an invisible tide. No one knows what happened to him or why he left. And then, the disappearances began. Not just of fishermen, but of others too. People who had never been seen again. All they left behind were whispers and the sound of something calling from the deep. No one can say for sure what it is. Some say it's a creature, others say it's a memory, but the sound still comes and the light still flickers. And somewhere in the dark, it's waiting for the next one to come back. I spoke with a retired Marine who claims he saw the bloop sound at dusk, a shimmering, silver light that moved like a living thing beneath the waves. He said it looked like a ghost trying to reach the surface. He told me the light vanished the moment he tried to take a photo. He said it was like looking at a mirage that knew he was watching. Another witness, a local fisherman, described hearing a low, resonant hum from the sea, a sound like the world was holding its breath. He said it made his bones vibrate and his skin crawl. He never spoke of it again, not even to his wife. He said it was something that didn't belong to this world and that it was watching him. There's a pattern in these testimonies. The light, the sound, the feeling of being watched. They all say the same thing. The bloop sound isn't just a sound, it's a presence. And if you've ever felt that chill in your bones when you're alone on the water, you might just know what they mean. We started with the basics, checking records, old newspapers, and the local library. The first thing we found was a 1946 article about a storm that swallowed the bloop sound whole and left no one alive to tell the tale. Then came the maps. The bloop sound wasn't on any modern chart, but in old nautical logs. It was marked with a red X and a warning. Here, the sea sings in the dark. One fisherman said he'd heard it once, a sound like the ocean crying out in a language that wasn't his. He said it made him feel like he was being watched, and he never dared return. Then there were the disappearances. Over the past 30 years, 3 men have vanished near the sound, and their last known words were all about a song that was never meant to be heard. It was like the sea itself had a secret, a story it wasn't ready to tell. And as we got closer, we realized that the bloop sound didn't just sing, it remembered. You know, the one thing that has always bugged me is that no one seems to know exactly what the bloop sound was. Was it a whale? A shell? Or something else entirely? It's like the ocean kept its secret. Some say it's a sonic echo from the deep, a whisper from something that doesn't belong to this world. Others say it's just the ocean doing what it does best, covering its tracks. It's like the ocean itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone to ask the wrong question, and then it answers with a sound that never repeats. So what do you think? Was the bloop just a trick of the waves, or was it something else entirely? Something that still listens, and waits, and remembers. You know, some folks say the bloop sound isn't just a place, it's a living memory. They whisper that the water remembers what it swallowed. Others claim the sound itself is a ghost, a voice calling from the deep. Some say it's the last word of a sailor who vanished in 1924, never to be found. They say the sound isn't meant for us. It's a door, or maybe a warning. And if you're ever curious, don't follow it. Just don't. So when you hear it, don't panic. Just listen. And maybe remember that some places don't want to be found. You know, sometimes the most haunting things are the ones we can't explain. And the bloop sound? That's one of them. No one's ever found the body. No one's ever seen the thing that made that sound. They say it's a whale, but no one's ever found a whale that big. They say it's a ghost, but who would be haunting the deep? And if it's a ghost, what did it die from? What did it want? And now, decades later, it's still coming. Some say it's a message. Others say it's a warning. But I wonder, what if it's just waiting for someone to finally listen? So, dear listener, as you turn off the light, I'll leave you with this. The bloop sound isn't just a mystery. It's a story. And maybe it's still listening for you. You've heard the echoes of the bloop sound, felt the weight of its silence. But sometimes, the most haunting stories are the ones that never quite end. There's a kind of peace in the unknown, a quiet truth that some mysteries are meant to linger, not be solved. So, before we step into the next shadow, let's take a moment. Breathe. Let the silence settle. Because sometimes, the best stories are the ones that leave you wondering, not screaming. You've heard the stories about the Stanley Hotel, haven't you? That grand old place in the Rockies where the mountains themselves seem to hold their breath. But there's one room that whispers louder than the rest, room 237. It was the room that never slept, or so the staff say. They hear footsteps in the hall, and sometimes the sound of a door creaking open in the middle of the night, even when the room was empty. Some say it was the room where the original Stanley Hotel burned down, and others claim it was the room where the owner's wife died. But the truth? Well, that's what makes it so damn intriguing, isn't it? And now, over 100 years later, the room still hums with a kind of silence that makes your skin prickle. You can almost hear it, can't you? The whisper of the past, waiting for someone to listen. You know, the Stanley Hotel wasn't always a place of haunted whispers. It started as a grand dream, a vision of a man who wanted to build a hotel that would make people feel like they were in the mountains, even if they were in the city. The man behind it all was Fred Harvey, a businessman with a knack for hospitality and a love for the dramatic. He wanted the hotel to be more than just a place to sleep. It was to be a place of wonder and comfort. But the hotel's real magic came from its design. The architects, working with Harvey, created something that felt like a mountain retreat from the moment you walked through the doors. Every detail was meant to transport you to a place of peace and grandeur. And then there was room 237. Not the room itself, but the people who stayed there. Some said it was a place of comfort. Others claimed it was where the hotel's true spirit began to take shape. But before the ghosts, there were people. Real people with real fears, real hopes, and real stories that shaped the hotel's legacy. And some of those stories are still waiting to be told. You remember the first time you noticed something wasn't quite right. It was the way the air felt heavier, like the walls were holding their breath. Then the whisper came, not a sound, but a presence. A voice, just at the edge of hearing, murmuring your name in a language you didn't know. The next morning, the concierge said nothing, but the hotel had a way of remembering things, especially the things that didn't belong to the living. You told yourself it was just the weight of the building, the echoes of a place that had seen too much. But you knew, deep down, that the whispers weren't going to stop. And you, dear listener, were about to find out just how far they would go to be heard. You remember the moment the lights flickered and the room seemed to hold its breath. That was when it began. No one could say for sure what exactly, but the air grew heavy, thick with the weight of something unseen. The clock on the wall stopped at 11:11, and for a heartbeat, the silence was absolute. Then came the whisper, soft like a sigh, but not from the room. It was as if the walls themselves were murmuring. Then the door, no one touched it, yet it creaked open. A draft, perhaps, but the air grew colder, and the scent of something old and faintly metallic lingered in the air. The last thing anyone heard was a voice, just one word, spoken in a tone that was both familiar and utterly foreign. "Help me." And then silence. No one knows what happened that night. Some say the voice was a warning. Others say it was the last cry of a soul still trapped in the walls. But one thing is certain, room 237 has never been the same since. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. One guest swore they saw a shadow move behind door number 237, just before the lights flickered out. It wasn't just the wind, there was something watching. Another said the room smelled like old books and something sweet and rotting like a memory that hadn't quite faded. Some say the room is haunted by the spirit of a woman who was never meant to be there, her story lost in the pages of the hotel's history. And then there's the man who claimed he saw a figure in the mirror, no reflection, just a woman standing there, smiling, as if she had always been part of the room. We tracked down the old maintenance logs from the 1970s, and what we found was a series of cryptic notes about strange noises coming from room 237. One entry even mentioned a man in a tuxedo being seen walking the halls late at night, but no one could say for sure if it was real or just a prank. The staff had also reported a strange smell, something like burnt sugar and old wood, that would waft through the halls when the room was empty. It was described as sweet, but with an underlying sense of something wrong. One of the letters even mentioned a mirror in room 237. A mirror that reflected something that wasn't there. The writer described seeing a figure in the glass, but when they turned around, there was no one. We also found a security camera still from 1997, showing a man standing in front of room 237, his face obscured, but his posture unmistakably tense. He was holding a small, folded piece of paper, like a note. And then there was the final piece of evidence, a single handwritten note found in the hotel's basement, left by a janitor who had worked there for decades. It read, "Room 237 is not empty. It never was." You know, the thing that's been bugging me for years is that no one seems to remember exactly what room 237 looked like. It's like the hotel's memory of it has faded, or maybe it never existed in the first place. Some say it was a suite, others claim it was just a regular room. The only thing we know for sure is that it was never photographed. Not even by the original architects, not even by the hotel's own historians. Some think the room was hidden or that it was never meant to be occupied. Others believe the hotel itself has a will, and it's protecting its secrets by making sure no one ever sees what was inside. And that's the real mystery, isn't it? Not the ghosts or the stories, but the fact that room 237 was never really there at all. Or maybe it was always there, and we just never saw it. Some say the real curse of room 237 isn't the ghost, it's the people who stay there. They come back, with stories of waking up to find their own reflection staring back at them, not their own faces. One local legend claims that the room is a portal, a place where the veil between worlds is thinnest. It's said the spirits of those who died in the hotel's past are trapped there, unable to move on without a visitor to help them cross. Others think the room was cursed by a jealous wife who once lived there. She claimed her husband was having an affair, and in a fit of rage, she poisoned him. The room has never been the same since. But the most unsettling story is that room 237 was the last place a famous writer ever stayed. He came back to the hotel, claiming he had unfinished work to finish. He never left. And now, the room is said to whisper his words to those who listen. So, when you hear the whispers in the hall, don't be surprised. Some say they're just the room remembering the people who stayed there. Others say they're the room trying to tell you something. And some say they're the room waiting for you. Even now, the mystery of room 237 lingers like a shadow at the edge of the mind. No one can agree on what happened there, and that's what makes it so haunting. Some say it was a suicide, others claim it was a murder, and a few insist it was something far stranger, something that never left the room. The truth, if it exists, has been buried beneath decades of speculation, silence, and the quiet weight of the Stanley Hotel itself. And so, room 237 remains just a room, a mystery, and a whisper of something that never left. You ever notice how some places feel like they're holding their breath? The Stanley Hotel's room 237, well, it's been holding its breath for decades. Maybe it's not the ghosts that linger there, but the stories. Stories that don't want to be forgotten, even if the world moves on. I wonder what secrets room 237 is still whispering to the night, and whether it's waiting for someone to finally listen. But don't worry, dear listener, there's always another tale waiting just around the corner, and I'll be right here with the fire, the stories, and the warmth. You've heard of the Chicago fire, but what about the night it nearly drowned the city? The Eastland, a luxury ferry, sank in Lake Michigan in 1915, taking over 800 souls with it. You ever wonder what it's like to be trapped in a sinking ship with no way out? This wasn't just a disaster, it was a tragedy that left a mark on the city and its people. You know how some places seem to hold their own secrets, waiting for the right moment to tell them? Some say the Eastland doesn't rest, that its passengers still haunt the waters, their silent screams echoing through the fog. You ever feel like a place has a story to tell, waiting for the right listener? Today, we're stepping aboard the Eastland to uncover its secrets. What if the real horror wasn't the sinking, but what came after? You ever wonder if some stories are too heavy for the world to carry? You know, the Eastland wasn't just a ship, it was a whole world of people, dreams, and ambitions. It was built to carry the hopes of thousands, but in the end, it carried more than it could hold. The ship was built in 1915 by the William Craven's Company, a name you might not recognize, but one that made a lot of money by building ships for the world's biggest companies. This ship had a crew, of course, and not just sailors, there were engineers, cooks, nurses, even a doctor. It was like a floating city, full of life and promise. And then there were the passengers, travelers from all walks of life, each with their own story, their own reason for being on that ship. Some were coming home, some were heading somewhere new. But even with all its promise, the Eastland was still a ship. And ships, like people, can have secrets, especially when they're built too fast and not for the right reasons. You can imagine the sky that day, just a pale bruise of gray, heavy with the weight of an unspoken warning. The wind had a way of whispering secrets only the most sensitive could hear. The Eastland was a marvel, a floating palace of steel and ambition, but even the mightiest ships can be caught in the grip of fate. It was the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, not the kind of silence you can explain, but the kind that makes your heart beat a little faster. The crew tried to ignore it, but the ship had a mind of its own. It was like it was waiting for something, or someone, to come along. You know, sometimes the worst stories aren't told in words, but in silence. The Eastland was a ship that never made it to its destination, but it left behind a silence that still echoes in the hearts of those who remember. One morning, the ship was full of people, workers, families, dreamers ready to begin their journey. But the calm before the storm was just that, a calm, and then a terrible, sudden crash. The ship sank fast, and the water took everything: lives, hope, and the sound of 1,000 voices. But the silence that followed was even louder. No screams, no cries, just the weight of what was lost. To this day, some say you can still hear the echo of a ship that never made it to shore. But the real tragedy isn't the silence. It's the lives that were never heard at all. I remember the smell of burning paper and the sound of people screaming. It was like the world had turned upside down and the sky was on fire. One woman said she saw a child's hand sticking out of the water, just floating there, like it was waiting for someone to pull it in. They spoke of a silence so deep it made your bones ache, like the world had forgotten to breathe. And then there was the voice, just one, repeating over and over, like a ghost trying to be heard above the chaos. Even now, decades later, the stories don't fade. They just grow louder, like the ship itself is still trying to speak. The investigation began with a simple question: what happened on that terrible day in 1915? The Eastland was more than a ship, it was a symbol of hope, and now it was a grave. They combed through the wreckage, piece by piece, but the more they found, the more they wondered what had truly been lost. There were whispers of things not found, people who vanished without a trace. Some claimed they heard voices in the dark, calling for help. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Death to the smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The records were incomplete, the witnesses few. Yet, something lingered in the air, an echo of the silence that followed the disaster. The truth was buried beneath the river, but the stories, those were still alive, waiting to be heard. You know, the one thing that has never been explained is why the Eastland's lifeboat was found empty, with no one inside. It's like the ship just let them go. Some say it was a miracle, others say it was a curse. But the truth, no one ever found a single body in that boat. Not one. They searched every inch of the boat, every nook and cranny, and still, no one was there. Just the echoes of the disaster and the silence of the missing. It's like the ship took them with it, or maybe the waters swallowed them whole before they ever had a chance to reach safety. Who knows? We'll never know. And that's the one thing that still haunts the Eastland story. Not the fire, not the explosion, not the bodies in the river, but the lifeboat, empty and waiting. Some say the Eastland's ghost is a woman in a long black dress, standing at the water's edge, her eyes locked on the city. Others insist she's a child, lost in the chaos of the sinking ship. There's a rumor that the ship's bell still rings on stormy nights, echoing through the city like a warning, though no one can say if it's real or just the wind. Some locals believe the ship's passengers are still trapped in the final moments, their voices carried on the wind, screaming for help that no one ever heard. And then there are those who say the Eastland is just a symbol, a reminder of how quickly life can vanish and how silence can speak louder than any scream. You know, some mysteries don't just fade away, they cling to the edges of memory, whispering in the dark. The Eastland disaster left more than just wreckage, it left questions that refused to die. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened in that fateful hour. Was it a faulty fire escape, a design flaw, or something more sinister? The answers remain buried beneath the city's ever-growing skyline. We look for closure, but sometimes the most haunting thing isn't what happened, it's what never was explained. And that, dear friends, is the truest kind of silence. So next time you walk past that old bridge or that abandoned dock, maybe you'll hear something. Maybe you will feel something. But remember, some stories are best left to the imagination. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the screams you hear, but the silence that follows. The Eastland didn't just sink, it left a mark on the hearts of those who lived through it. And in the quiet spaces between the stories, the echoes of the past still whisper. So, before we move on, I'll leave you with a question: what do you hear when the world goes quiet? Stay with me, and we'll hear the next tale together. You've heard of the Dunblane School, haven't you? A place that once buzzed with laughter, now whispering secrets in the wind. You ever wonder what lingers when the children are gone? Once it was a haven for young minds, a place of chalk and crayons, of stories and songs. Now it's a quiet ghost town where the past clings to the walls like dust. But it's not just the silence that lingers, it's the stories. Tales of a teacher who vanished, of bodies found in the woods, of a place where the air feels heavy with something ancient and wrong. You ever feel like some places just remember you? Like they're waiting for you to step inside and see what they've been hiding all this time. You remember the day the world stopped, don't you? It was a cold, gray morning in 1996, and the sky felt like it was holding its breath. A teacher named Thomas Watt took his two young sons to school that day, only to find the world had changed forever. The school was empty, the windows dark, and the silence heavy with something unspoken. Two young boys, aged 4 and 6, were among the first to be taken. Their bodies were found in the playground, and the horror of what happened there is still etched in the hearts of those who remember. In the years that followed, the world tried to move on, but the memory of that day lingers like a ghost. It's not just about the tragedy, it's about the silence that followed and the questions that remain unanswered. And so, the Dunblane School became a place of mourning, but also a place of haunting. The story isn't just about the past, it's about the lingering echoes of a terrible loss. You remember how the day started, don't you? The sky was a pale, washed-out gray, like the world had forgotten to wake up. The quiet kind of dread hung in the air, like the kind that comes before a storm. The school was quiet, too quiet. No laughter, no chatter, just the low hum of a world holding its breath. It was the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl, like something was watching from the shadows. Parents were arriving, too, but their faces were pale and drawn. They didn't speak much, just nodded and exchanged worried glances. You could tell they knew something wasn't right, even if they didn't know what. And then, just before the bell was due to ring, a teacher stepped out of the building, looking shaken. Their voice was too quiet to hear, but you could tell they were saying something like, "This isn't right. This isn't right at all." That's when the first real chill came, not from the cold, but from the silence, like the world had paused, and the only thing left was the sound of your own heartbeat. You know, sometimes the worst things happen in the quietest places, like a school, where children should be learning, not being hurt. It was a normal Monday morning, until the principal came in and found the first body, just a child, curled up on the floor, eyes wide, blood pooling around them. The next day, the police arrived, and they found more bodies, some in classrooms, some in the hallways, some in the basement, all just gone. But the real horror wasn't just the bodies. It was the silence. The way the school seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen next. And then, the last body was found. A boy, barely 6, lying on the floor, his small hands still curled around a toy he'd been holding just before he vanished. To this day, the school still feels like it's waiting for something, like it's holding its breath, just like the children once did. I remember the day the world stopped for a moment and the silence was louder than any scream. Some say they heard a child's laugh, but I swear I heard nothing at all. One woman said she saw a shadow move in the hallway just before the first body was found. She described it as tall and moving with a slow, deliberate grace, like something from a dream. There were no clear answers, only stories that grew darker with each retelling. Some claimed they saw something in the woods, something that wasn't of this world. The most unsettling testimony came from a boy who said he saw the killer walking through the halls, but not with feet. It was like the floor was holding him up, not the ground. No one knows who did it, and no one knows why. But the stories remain, passed from one listener to the next, like a whisper in the dark. The investigation started with a single phone call, a mother's voice trembling as she described the horror of finding her child's body. The police arrived, but the silence that followed was louder than any scream. They combed through every inch of the school, but the deeper they dug, the more the truth seemed to vanish. Like the children, it was gone, leaving only the cold, empty space where it had once been. The more they found, the more it felt like the school itself was hiding something, a secret buried in the earth, or perhaps in the hearts of those who had once watched over these children. They looked for answers in the past, but the past refused to speak. All it left was the weight of silence, the kind that sits heavy in the air and lingers in the minds of those who are left behind. The investigation ended, but the questions remain. Some say the school is still waiting for someone to listen, to ask the right questions, and to hear the truth that has been buried for so long. You know, the thing that haunts me most about this case isn't the blood or the bodies, it's the silence. The silence that followed. No one asked the right questions, and no one wanted to hear the answers. There was a moment, just after the tragedy, when the world seemed to hold its breath. But then, like a curtain drawn too quickly, the headlines faded and the story was buried. Forgotten. Really. The police, the media, the politicians, they all had their stories. But none of them had the one that mattered. The one that was never asked. And that's the thing, isn't it? The one detail that has never been explained. The one that no one wanted to face. The one that still lingers in the silence, waiting for someone to ask the question. Some say the school itself is a living thing, a place that remembers. You ever notice how the old buildings seem to hold their breath sometimes, like they're waiting for something to wake up? Others whisper that the children's voices are still here, trapped in the walls. You ever hear that strange, high-pitched sound at night? Like someone's humming a lullaby you don't recognize. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Def smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. There's even a local legend about a secret tunnel beneath this school, where the children once played. Some say it's still there, just waiting for the right time to open. And then there are the people who believe it wasn't a tragedy at all, but a warning. A message left behind by the children, a message we're still trying to understand. So, do you think the school remembers? Or is it just us trying to hold on to something that was taken too soon? You know, sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones we never solve. The Dunblane case is one of those. No one ever found the bodies, and no one ever stopped asking questions. The police closed the case, but the townspeople never did. Every year on the anniversary, they gather outside the school, lighting candles and whispering prayers to the ghosts they believe still walk the halls. We'll never know who did this or why, but we can still feel the weight of it. The silence that followed, the fear that lingered, the lives that were taken without a word. So here's to the unsolved, to the stories that haunt us not with answers but with questions, to the silence that speaks louder than any scream. You ever think about the silence that follows a scream? It's the kind that lingers like a ghost in the hallway, waiting for someone to remember to turn the lights on. There's something about a place that's been touched by tragedy. It doesn't just haunt the walls, it haunts the air you breathe. Sometimes, the only thing left to do is listen, not for the voices, but for the silence that says, I remember. And if you're ever walking down a quiet road at dusk, and you hear something just beyond the edge of your hearing, well, don't look back. Not yet. Now, let's move on to the next tale. One that's just as quiet, just as haunted, and maybe just a little bit more personal. You've heard of the Dunblane School, haven't you? A place that once buzzed with the laughter of children and the warmth of 100 teachers. But now, it's a quiet shell, where the echoes of the past linger like ghosts. It was a place of learning, yes, but also of tragedy. A day that changed everything. A day that left a mark on the hearts of a whole town. And now, the silence speaks louder than any scream. The stories start with whispers, with a sense that something is watching, something that hasn't moved on. The air feels heavier here, as if the weight of sorrow has settled into the very walls. But the most unsettling thing is the absence of sound. No bird song, no rustle of leaves, just the wind howling through the empty halls. It's as if the school is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And so, we come to Dunblane, a place where the past refuses to stay buried, where every shadow holds a memory, and every whisper is a story waiting to be told. You know, back in 1996, the Dunblane School was just like any other little school in a quiet Scottish town. A place where children learned, laughed, and grew. But that all changed on a cold, gray morning in January. The principal, Margaret Smith, was a kind woman who had spent decades nurturing the young minds of Dunblane. She believed in the power of education and the safety of her students. But safety had a different meaning that day. The day started like any other. Teachers arrived, students walked in, the usual chatter filled the halls. Then, the unthinkable happened. A tragic event that would change everything. A loss that would haunt this place for years to come. The tragedy was never just about one moment. It was about the lives that were lost, the families left behind, and the silence that followed. A silence that has never truly faded from this place. You might wonder, what makes a place like Dunblane School still feel like it holds its breath? It's not just the silence. It's the weight of history, the echoes of laughter, and the sorrow of what was taken. And so, we begin our journey into the heart of the Dunblane School. Not just the building, but the memory of those who were there, and the stories that still linger in the shadows. You remember the day, don't you? The sky was gray, the air thick, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. That morning, everything seemed normal, like the storm was just passing through. But something was off. The principal had called a meeting, and the parents were restless. They kept asking questions, like they knew something was about to break, like they could feel it in their bones. The teachers were acting strange. They kept glancing at the windows, as if something was watching. One of them, a young woman with a kind face, kept whispering to herself, like she was speaking to someone who wasn't there. Even the children were different. They wouldn't look at the principal. They clung to each other, their eyes wide with something that wasn't fear, but something deeper, like they knew something we didn't. And then, just before the storm hit, a child ran past the principal's office screaming. No one knew where they were going, but we all knew something was about to change. You see it now, the moment frozen in time. A schoolhouse bathed in the pale light of an overcast morning, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and old wood. A child's footprints, soft and pale, trail through the grass, leading into the mist. The doors were left ajar, as if someone had simply stepped inside and never come back. The silence is heavy, like the weight of 1,000 unspoken words, and the air is still holding its breath. There's a stillness here, a silence that feels too loud. You can almost feel the absence of the children, the weight of their missing presence pressing against the air like a ghost. In the silence, you can almost hear the echo of a child's voice calling out, but it fades before you can catch it. You feel it, the pull of something unseen, something that never left. I spoke to a woman in Perth who said she saw a figure in the hallway just before the tragedy. She described it as a young girl, no older than 10, wearing a blue dress, standing silently in the dark. Another teacher claimed he heard a child's voice calling from the stairwell, echoing through the empty corridors. He said it was clear, not a trick of the wind or a prank. Some parents swore they saw a ghostly apparition outside the school gates, waving at them as they drove away. They said it was a child, but none could say which one. One man, who used to work at the school, told me he still hears the children at night. He said they're not asking for help, just reminding him of what was lost. These stories don't prove anything, but they do remind us that some places hold memories that refuse to let go. And sometimes, those memories are still waiting to be heard. The investigation started like any other, with a team of experts and local volunteers, but something about Dunblane felt different. You could almost hear the whispers, like the school itself was watching. They found old records, but nothing explained what happened. Some said the kids were taken, others said they vanished into the woods. The truth, if it exists, seems to be hiding in plain sight. One of the investigators found a hidden room beneath the gym, untouched for decades. It was cold, and the air smelled like old paper and something else, something not quite natural. They found a journal, written by a teacher who vanished in 1996. It was filled with warnings, but also with something else, something like hope, or maybe a plea for help that no one ever heard. The team left with more questions than answers, but something in the air made them pause. You could almost feel it, a presence, waiting, watching, just out of reach. You know, there's one thing that's always bugged me about this case. The exact moment the bus hit the road, the exact moment it went off the bridge. No one saw it, not even the driver. Just silence. A silence that's never been explained. The police said it was an accident, but the silence of that day, the way the bus just vanished, it feels more like a ghost. A ghost that's still waiting to be heard. They say the bus driver was a good man, a father of two. But what if he didn't see the bridge? What if he saw something and just stopped? We can't know what happened that day, but we can remember the children, and we can keep asking, even if the silence never answers. You know, some folks say the school's old stone walls still hum with the memory of those fateful days. They whisper that the children's laughter never truly faded, just faded into the silence. There's a local legend about a ghostly choir that still sings in the chapel, their voices echoing through the empty hallways like a lullaby from another time. And then there are the rumors about the well. Some say it's still a portal, a place where the lost can be found if you listen closely enough. But I think the real mystery is the silence that followed, the kind of silence that lingers like a memory you can't quite place, but you know is there. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You know, sometimes the worst things happen in the quietest places. The school was just a brick building, and yet, it swallowed those lives whole. What do you think they're whispering in the halls now? The case was closed, but the truth never was. The police file says no suspects, but you know what they don't tell you? That the real mystery is still waiting for someone to listen. Sometimes, the only way to find the truth is to ask the right questions. What if the answer isn't in the records, but in the silence between the lines? And so, the mystery lingers, not because it's unsolved, but because it's still waiting. Waiting for someone to stop and listen. Waiting for someone to remember. So, what do you think? Is the truth out there, or is it still inside the walls, waiting for someone brave enough to ask the right question? You know, sometimes the most haunted places aren't the ones you expect. A quiet school, a small town, a single day, those can hold more than you'd think. We don't always hear the whispers of the past until we're ready to listen. And sometimes, the silence is the loudest of all. As you leave this tale, remember, the past is not gone, it's just waiting for the right moment to be remembered. And now, as the night deepens, I wonder what story will you hear next? You've heard of places that whisper, but this one doesn't just speak, it screams. The Priory of Saint Foy, nestled in the quiet French countryside, has a reputation that clings like a shadow. You ever wonder what happens when a place is so haunted, it becomes louder than the living? The Priory was once a place of worship, but now it's a hollow shell. You can almost hear the echoes of the past in the creak of the wood and the wind that never seems to stop. Some say it's the spirits of the nuns who once lived there, trapped in their own silence. There are stories, whispers passed down through generations. Some say the nuns were silenced by their own vows, others that they were silenced by something far darker. What do you think happened here? Did they vanish, or were they never truly there at all? The silence here isn't empty, it's full of voices. Some say you can hear them at night, when the wind dies down and the world goes still. You ever wonder if silence is the loudest sound of all? Back in the 12th century, this land was a quiet farming village, but the monks of Saint Foy saw potential. They came with their books, their prayers, and a dream of building something eternal. They built the priory with hands and hope, but also with iron will. The monks were strict, their days ruled by prayer, labor, and the ever-present shadow of the Black Death. Among the monks was Brother Guillaume, a man of quiet strength and sharp eyes. He was said to know the secrets of the land, and he often wandered the forests alone, returning with strange trinkets and stories. But the priory's true mystery began when a young girl named Isabelle vanished without a trace. The monks searched for weeks, but the forest swallowed her whole, and the silence that followed was louder than any scream. They call it the screaming silence not because of what was heard, but because of what was never said. The monks tried to bury their fear, but the forest had other plans. And so the priory stood, a silent witness to the passage of time, the weight of history, and the echoes of a girl's last breath in the woods. You remember the first time you heard the silence? It wasn't loud, just too quiet, like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving only the weight of what was never said. The caretakers said it was just the wind, but the wind never stops in a place like this. And the wind doesn't whisper like that. It doesn't whisper at all. The caretaker's wife heard it too. She said it came from the east wing, where the old chapel once stood. She swore she saw a figure in the doorway, but when she turned, there was nothing. They tried to ignore it, but silence is a kind of sound, and the priory wasn't done speaking. It just hadn't found the right voice yet. You ever heard a silence so thick it feels like it's holding its breath? That's what the villagers of Saint Foy whispered about. A silence so deep it drowned out the wind and the crickets, leaving only the echo of a scream that never came. In the year of our Lord 1472, the prior of Saint Foy vanished without a sound. No ransom, no trail, just a door left ajar and a candle burning low in the chapel, as if someone had been there, and then simply stopped. The candle burned for 3 days until it melted down to the floor, and the silence returned. No one dared go near the chapel again. They said the prior had gone to the place where the silence was strongest, the place where the dead still whisper and the living are never heard. Now, every year on the anniversary of the prior's disappearance, the candle is relit. But this time, someone says they heard a sound. A whisper, not a scream, just a voice saying, "Let me out." I've spoken to dozens of people who say they heard the scream, but no one can agree on when or where it came from. One man said it was just after midnight, another swore it was during the day, and a third insisted it came from the very walls of the priory itself. One woman told me she was walking home through the woods and heard it so clearly she stopped in her tracks, only to find no one around. She said the scream didn't sound like a person, it sounded like a child, but with something wrong in its tone. There are even reports of people hearing the scream in their dreams, waking up screaming themselves, only to find the room empty. It's as if the priory isn't just haunted, it's whispering to those who are already lost. And the most chilling part? No one has ever been able to repeat the scream. It's like the priory only speaks in moments, and once it's said, it's gone like a ghost that only appears once, then disappears forever. We followed the trail of whispers to a forgotten archive, where yellowed pages whispered of a tragedy no one wanted to remember. The air smelled like old paper and something more, like the memory of a scream. The record spoke of a mass disappearance in the 1800s, a silent exodus from the priory that left behind only silence and the faint echo of a lullaby. No one would talk about it, not even the locals. We found a hidden chamber beneath the floorboards, its walls lined with strange symbols and a single, rusted bell. When we touched it, the silence in the room changed. It became heavy like the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. The final clue is a letter, sealed in wax, written in a trembling hand. It spoke of a curse, of a promise made in blood, and of a child who never grew old. It ended with the words, "The silence is not the end, it is the beginning." And so, we left with more questions than answers, the silence trailing behind us like a shadow we could not shake. The priory still watches, still waits, and still sings, in a language only the lost can understand. You know, the thing that's always bugged me about the priory is the silence. No one ever explains why the place is so quiet. You'd think a place with a history like that would echo with something more. The monks left no records of screams, no accounts of terror, just a sudden, total quiet, like the world held its breath for a moment, and then nothing. Some say it's the silence of the dead, others say it's the silence of the living, afraid to speak. But the truth, no one knows, and maybe that's the real scream. So, what do you think? Is the silence a warning, a memory, or just the end of a story that never got to finish? You've heard the stories, but some folks say the real ghosts are the ones who don't want to be found. They whisper in the back of the church, in the old cemetery, in the shadows of the stone walls. Some say the nuns kept secrets, others say the priory was built on a burial ground. And then there's the theory that the screams came from the children who never left the walls. The townsfolk still debate whether the silence is a curse or a cover-up. Some believe the place is too sacred to be disturbed, others think it's too dangerous to be left alone. And then there are the ones who say the screams are still there, just waiting for someone to listen. that the silence is only a pause before the next whisper. And still, no one has found the body. No one has found the truth. You know what's strange? The police say the woods were clear that night, but the forest itself remembers something else. They say the only clue is a broken pocket watch found near the priory, its hands frozen at 3:17. That's the time the scream started. That's the time the silence began. Some say the priory isn't haunted. Some say it's a place where the dead are still waiting for someone to listen. And some say the silence isn't a lack of sound, it's a sound we can't hear. So what do you think? Was it a child lost in the woods, or something else? Was it a warning, or a whisper from the past? That's the question that lingers. And that's why we keep coming back to the priory, to the silence, to the stories that refuse to die. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You know, sometimes the most terrifying silence is the one that follows a scream. It's like the air holds its breath, waiting for something to break it. But in the priory, the silence was never empty, it was full of ghosts. And when the silence does return, it's not the absence of sound, it's the presence of something unseen. Like the wind has learned to whisper in a language we can't understand. But here's the thing about silence, it doesn't just stay in a place and moves, it lingers, and sometimes it finds you. So as you turn the page, remember this, some stories don't end, they just wait. And sometimes they whisper. You've heard of the Stanley Hotel, that grand old relic in Colorado, right? Well, it's not just the mountains that make it special, it's the rooms, especially room 237. You ever wonder what happens when a place holds too many secrets? This hotel was built in the early 1900s, a dream for the wealthy and the curious. But it wasn't just a place to stay, it was a stage for madness, a place where people claimed to see things they couldn't explain. Room 237, in particular, has a reputation that's as thick as the mist in the morning. Some say it's haunted, others say it's just a place where the mind plays tricks. But there's something about that room that just feels wrong. You know what they say about places that hold too many secrets? They don't just disappear, they linger. And room 237 has a way of making sure you never forget it. So, what do you think? Is room 237 just a room, or is it something more? I'll tell you more about the stories, the legends, and the people who claim to see something in that room. You know, the Stanley Hotel wasn't just a place for the wealthy back in 1909, it was a dream made real, built by a man who wanted to leave his mark on the world. And that man? His name was Frederick Stanley, and he had a vision that would change the city of Denver forever. Stanley was a railroad tycoon, a man who built empires with his own two hands. He poured every penny he had into this hotel, hoping it would be a place where the elite could gather, relax, and be dazzled by his wealth. But Stanley wasn't just building a hotel, he was building a legacy. And that legacy would come at a cost. The man who designed the hotel, his name was Henry Melville, and he had a secret that would haunt the hotel long after his death. Melville was a brilliant architect, but he was also a man who had a past. Some say he was involved in a tragedy that left him broken. Others say he was a man who tried to escape a life of crime. Either way, his presence in the Stanley Hotel would leave an indelible mark. And so, the Stanley Hotel was built not just as a place of luxury, but as a monument to ambition and the price of leaving your mark on the world. It was a place that would eventually become famous for something far more sinister than its grandeur. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the sun barely kissed the window, and you heard a faint, rhythmic tapping like someone tapping on the wall with his stick, just not quite right. You checked the door, but it was locked. No one was there. Just the sound, like a heartbeat, echoing through the empty corridor. You felt a chill, not from the air, but from the silence that followed. That night, you woke to the sound of a door creaking open. You looked around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. The only thing that moved was a small, dust-covered clock on the nightstand, its hands moving backward. You tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the mind, or a faulty clock. But the next morning, the clock was gone, and the room was cold like it had been sitting in the dark for years. And then, you started seeing it. A figure in the corner of your vision, just a flicker of movement. You turned, but there was nothing. Only the feeling that something was watching, waiting for you. You know the story of the Stanley Hotel's room 237, but what about the night it all went wrong? The night the door wouldn't open, and the silence was louder than any scream. The maid found the door unlocked, but no one was inside. Just a single empty chair, a half-empty glass of wine, and a faint scent of lavender and something else, something wrong. Years later, the room was sealed off, but the story never stopped growing. Some say the room still waits for the right person to find it. Some say it's not a room, it's a door to something else. And you, dear listener, have heard the story. But have you ever wondered what if the room isn't waiting for someone to find it? What if it's waiting for someone to finally go in? I've spoken to dozens of people who say they've seen room 237, but none can agree on what exactly they saw. Some say they saw a shadow, others a man in a tuxedo, and a few swear they heard a child's voice whispering their name. One woman told me she woke up in her own bed, but the mirror showed her standing in that room, staring at her own reflection, only it wasn't her. It was someone else, someone familiar, but not quite. There's even a man who says he was in the room with Kubrick, and he claims Kubrick wasn't there to film. He said Kubrick was there to find something that had been hidden for decades. These accounts are more than just stories. They're fragments of something deeper, something that lingers in the spaces between the real and the imagined. And they all point to the same place, room 237. We began with the old blueprints, you know, the kind that smell like old paper and dust. They showed room 237 as a kind of afterthought tucked between the hotel's grand halls like a forgotten secret. Then we went through the maintenance logs. Some of them were scribbled in a hurry, like someone was trying to erase a mistake. One entry mentioned a broken window in 237, but the date was missing. Odd, isn't it? We found a hotel employee who remembered the late 70s. He said room 237 was never occupied, not even by the staff. It was like it was waiting for someone, he said. A bit spooky, isn't it? One of the most chilling things we found was a series of anonymous letters. They were addressed to room 237, but they never came. Just signed the Stanley, with no return address. You ever get the feeling someone is watching you? And then there was the radio. Some say it still crackles in the early hours, like it's waiting for someone to listen. You ever heard a voice that seems to come from the walls, not the air? You know, there's one thing about room 237 that still haunts me. No one can explain why the door never locked. It's like the hotel itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Even the hotel's own staff won't say for sure if the door ever locked. Some say it was always locked, others say it was never locked, and some say it's still open, just waiting for the next guest to walk through. The mystery isn't just in the room, it's in the silence. The way the walls seem to listen. The way the air feels heavier when you're near it. It's like the hotel is holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally ask the wrong question. And you know what's really strange? No one has ever been able to find the key, not even the hotel's most seasoned staff. It's like the key has been lost to time and the room has been waiting for someone to find it. You know, some say room 237 wasn't just haunted, it was cursed. The locals tell tales of how it's the only room in the hotel that the ghosts don't let anyone stay in. They say the walls themselves are alive, and if you listen closely, you can hear the whispers of a man who never left. Some say it's not the room itself, but the man who once lived there. A writer, a poet, a man who poured his soul into the hotel's halls. He was obsessed with the place, and when he vanished, the hotel seemed to remember him. Some even say he's still writing in the walls. There's even a theory that the room was once the studio of a madman. You've heard the stories about the man who tried to build a tower to the sky and ended up tearing down the hotel instead. Some say the room is where his last words were written. And then there are the ones who say the room is a mirror, not just of the past, but of the soul. Some say if you look too long, you'll see yourself in the room older, wiser, or maybe not yourself at all. But no matter the story, one thing remains true. Room 237 is a place that refuses to be forgotten. It's a room that remembers, and it's always been waiting for someone to listen. Even now, decades later, the whispers of room 237 echo through the halls of the Stanley Hotel. No one can say for sure what really happened that night, and that's what makes it so unsettling. The staff still talks about the strange sounds that come from that room, like footsteps, or maybe just the wind. But the hotel's management won't let anyone stay there anymore, not even for a moment. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Some say the room is haunted by the spirit of a writer, others believe it's just a place where reality broke down. The truth, if it exists, remains buried deep in the hotel's dark heart. And so, the mystery lingers like a candle flickering in the dark, waiting for someone to finally reach for it. You know, sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones with ghosts, but the ones that make you wonder if you've ever truly left a place behind. Room 237 might be gone, but its echoes remain in the hearts of those who have felt its pull, even if they never walked through its door. But before we move on, let me ask you, have you ever felt like a place was watching you, even when you were long gone? Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a tale of a small town and a woman who vanished without a sound. But first, let's light the fire a little brighter. You ever heard of a place where books whisper secrets and the silence is louder than the pages? That's the Library of Congress, where history is stored in the quietest, most sacred corners of the world. They say the library holds more than just books, it holds the weight of every story ever told, and sometimes the weight of the stories that were never meant to be told. There are whispers of voices in the stacks, of footsteps in the dead of night, of books that close on their own like someone is reading them, but no one's there. And then there are the disappearances, books that vanish, or worse, people who vanish, leaving only a trail of unanswered questions and the faintest scent of something old and wrong. So, what do you think? Is it the weight of history, or something else that lingers in the silence? Or are we just imagining it? Or maybe it's not imagining at all. You know, the Library of Congress wasn't always a quiet place of books and silence. In the 1800s, it was a bustling hive of activity, with scholars and scribes racing to catalog the nation's treasures. The original building, designed by architect Charles Bulfinch, was meant to be a grand repository of knowledge. But even then, there were whispers of something watching from the stacks. And then there was the woman who worked in the archives, a quiet, sharp-eyed librarian named Elena. She claimed she saw shadows moving in the stacks, and that the books whispered to her in the night. Some say she was just a lonely woman with a vivid imagination. Others say she was the first to hear the voices in the books, and that her story was never properly told. The Library of Congress has been a place of learning for centuries, but even in the most enlightened of times, there were those who believed that some knowledge comes at a cost. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. It was a quiet Tuesday, the kind where the air felt heady and the silence was too loud. You were deep in a book, and then something shifted in the corner of your eye. The clock on the wall ticked faster than it should. You glanced up, and for a moment, the room seemed to breathe like it had its own heartbeat, slow and deliberate. Then, it stopped. The next morning, you came back to find your chair moved. Not just shifted, but repositioned to face a shelf you'd never noticed before. And on that shelf, a book you'd never seen except in your dreams. You tried to laugh it off, but the book called to you. Not with words, but with a pull in your chest, like it was waiting for you to open it. And you knew, with a sickening certainty, that once you did, you'd never close it again. You know, the Library of Congress isn't just a place for dusty books and old maps, it's also where some of the most chilling disappearances in American history have taken place. One of the most haunting is the story of a librarian who vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a single, unanswered question: what happened to her? She was a quiet woman, known for her meticulous work and her peculiar habit of whispering to the books. One morning, she never came to work. Her desk was untouched, her coffee still warm, and the last book she'd touched lay open to a page that had been marked with a red pencil. The only clue left behind was a note, written in her own hand tucked inside the book she'd left open. It read, "I'm not here anymore," but the books are. No one knows what she meant, or where she went. Some say she was taken by the books themselves. Others believe she simply vanished into the archives, never to return. To this day, the archives remain untouched by modern technology. No cameras, no microphones, no digital records. Just the quiet hum of the building, the whisper of the wind through the windows, and the feeling that something or someone is still there, waiting. And if you ever find yourself wandering through the halls of the Library of Congress at night, remember this: the books are never truly still. They remember, they wait, and sometimes they call. I still remember the first time I heard about the Library of Congress whispering in the dark. A librarian in Washington, D.C. said the books seem to hum when the lights are low, and the sound grows louder when you're alone. One woman swore she heard a voice calling her name from the stacks, but when she turned, there was no one there, just the sound of pages turning, like a ghost flipping through history. Some say the library is haunted by the spirit of a lost archivist, someone who once cataloged the secrets of the world and now watches over them from the silence of the stacks. But what truly unsettles is the silence between the whispers. It's not the voices that linger, it's the absence of sound when you're sure something is listening. If you ever find yourself in the stacks, listen closely. The library doesn't just hold knowledge, it holds stories that refuse to be forgotten, and sometimes, they're not so willing to let you go. We followed the trail of whispers through the stacks, where dust motes danced in the pale light like tiny ghosts. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and something more elusive like the memory of a forgotten scream. One file, marked only with a red X and a faded stamp, led us to a room that hadn't been used in decades. The silence was so complete, it felt like the walls were holding their breath. We found a journal, its pages brittle and yellowed, filled with meticulous notes and ink that had bled through the paper. The writer spoke of a shadow that moved without light and a sound like pages turning in the dark. The final clue was a name: Alice Whitmore, a librarian who vanished in 1967. Her desk was still there, untouched, and the last note in her journal read, "It's waiting for me." And that's when the lights flickered, and for a moment, the silence broke not with sound, but with a feeling of being watched. The archives had more to say, and we weren't ready to listen. You know how sometimes a detail seems so small, yet it haunts you more than the whole story? Well, this one, it's just a single word, but it's the ghost of the whole thing. It's written in a margin, not in the main text. No one ever noticed it. No one ever asked why it was there. And yet, it's the only thing that makes the whole story feel unfinished. They've searched the archives for decades. They've checked every index, every catalog, every footnote. And yet, that word, it's still there, waiting, like a secret the library itself refuses to let go. It's not the ghosts that linger here. It's the questions, the things we can't answer. And that word, it's the one that's never been explained. Not yet. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what the librarians say about the whispers in the stacks? Some say the ghosts are just old books, and others say they're the voices of those who never found their way out. There's a local legend that the library's original basement was built over a Civil War battlefield, and the echoes of the fallen still linger in the marble halls, especially after a storm. Some say the real curse isn't the ghosts, but the knowledge they guard. A librarian once told me that the library holds more secrets than any other place in the world, and some people are too afraid to know the truth. And then there are the people who claim to have seen a figure in the stacks, always just out of reach, always disappearing when they try to get closer. It's hard to tell if they're real or just the imagination of someone who's been reading too much. But maybe the real mystery is why we keep coming back, drawn by the silence, the stories, and the feeling that somewhere in those endless shelves, there's something waiting to be found. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the ghosts, but the questions that never get answered, like the whispers in the stacks that no one can quite place. There's a file, still open, still waiting. No one knows who it belongs to, or why it was never closed. Just a name, a date, and a question that no one dares to ask aloud. Some say the library is haunted by the weight of its own history, but maybe it's just haunted by the people who came before us, those who walked these halls and left their stories behind. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. We can't solve every mystery, but we can remember them. And sometimes, remembering is the closest we can get to closure. So here's to the unsolved, the unknown, and the stories that linger in the silence between the lines. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. The Library of Congress, with its endless rows of books and hushed corridors, is no exception. What do you think is whispering through those stacks? I've heard the voices in the stacks, the tapping of unseen fingers, the soft rustle of pages turning on their own. It's not the ghosts you expect, it's the stories themselves, lingering, waiting to be remembered. So, as we turn the page and the lights dim, remember, some stories are meant to be told, and some are meant to be felt. What will you feel when the next tale begins? Stay with me, and let's go deeper into the dark. After all, there's always more to read and more to hear. You ever heard the whispers in the walls? The ones that don't sound like people, but like something ancient and lost, trying to get out. This place? It's called the Asylum of St. Mary, and it's got a reputation that's colder than the winter nights it's buried in. It's not just the stones that scream, it's the silence between them. You can hear the wind howling through the cracks, but it's not the wind, it's something else. Something that lingers, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. They say the walls were built to keep the madness in, but they've always been louder than the people who lived here. Some say the screams you hear aren't just echoes, they're the voices of the ones who never left. And if you listen closely, you might hear them too. Not in the way you think, not in the way you expect. Just a whisper, a sigh, a sound that doesn't belong. That's when you realize you're not alone in the silence. You know, the story of St. Mary's Hospital begins not with screams, but with a man named Dr. John Abernathy, who believed in the power of science to heal the mind, not just the body. He dreamed of a place where the broken could find peace, not punishment. But in those days, the line between treatment and cruelty was as thin as a patient's hope. Abernathy had his own kind of faith, in reason, in order, in the idea that the mind could be tamed with the right tools. Patients came from far and wide, the poor, the desperate, the ones who had no one left to turn to. Some were treated with kindness, others with fear. And over the years, the walls began to remember the echoes of their suffering. The hospital grew, and with it, its secrets. Some say it was the patients who whispered their pain into the stone, and others say it was the doctors who left their guilt there. Either way, the walls learned to speak, in the form of cries, in the form of silence. And so, St. Mary's became more than a hospital. It became a place of legend, a place where the line between the living and the dead grew thinner. And that's how it all began, with a man's dream and a building that would never forget. You remember the way the air felt in those early days, thick and quiet, like the world had paused to listen. Then just a whisper like a child's breath in the dark echoed from the walls, and the silence turned into something else entirely. The nurses called it a trick of the wind, or maybe the old stones settling. But you noticed the way the whispers grew like a tide, and how the walls seemed to lean in, holding their breath. The staff began to leave, one by one, claiming they heard voices calling their names. Some said they saw a figure in the halls, but it was always gone before they could catch a glimpse. And then, one morning, the doors were locked from the inside. No one could get in, and the walls were still whispering. You could almost hear them saying, "Come closer." You know, sometimes the most chilling things aren't what you see, but what you hear. There's a sound that haunts the walls of St. Mary's, a sound that comes from the very stones themselves. It's not a scream, not exactly. It's more like a low, guttural wail echoing through the halls at midnight. Some say it's the voice of a patient trapped in the walls, others say it's the spirit of a nurse who never left. They tried to ignore it at first, thinking it was just the wind, but the wails grew louder. Some nights, they could hear it clearly, like a child's voice calling out through the walls, begging for someone to find them. Then, on the night of the storm, the sound stopped. No one heard it again. But the next morning, Mary O'Connor was found, her body cold, her face frozen in a silent scream, with no sign of struggle. They never found the body. They never found the child. But the sound still comes, every winter, every storm, every time the wind howls through the broken windows of St. Mary's. I've spoken with several witnesses who swear they heard the walls of SAINT Chinese letter whisper in the dead of night. One woman, a nurse who worked there in the 70s, said the sound was like a child's voice, calling out for help. Another man, a former patient, claims the walls would groan and scream when the wind blew through the broken windows. He said it was like the building itself was in pain. Some say the voices were not just sounds, but warnings. A local historian told me that the asylum was built on a site where several families vanished without a trace. The walls, they say, remember. There's even a recording, though no one can confirm its authenticity, of a faint, unintelligible voice repeating, help me," over and over, like a lullaby gone wrong. These stories are just tales to scare the children. They're echoes of something real, something that lingers in the silence between the screams. We started with the records, you know, dusty files and brittle paper, but the silence was louder than any scream. The nurses spoke of a place where the walls seemed to weep, not with tears, but with voices, whispers that wouldn't stop. Then we walked the halls, and the air got heavy. The walls weren't just cold, they had a weight, like they remembered every breath taken and every breath stolen. It wasn't just the silence, it was the absence of sound. One of the nurses, a woman in her 80s, told us about the screaming walls, not the sound, but the feeling. You could hear the voices in your bones, she said, like the walls were trying to tell you something you weren't ready to listen to. We checked the security footage from the 1980s, and it was like the hospital had a heartbeat of its own. The cameras would roll, then stop, then roll again, as if something was pulling the wires. The footage was grainy, but there was a pattern, a figure in the corner, always moving, never still. The most disturbing thing wasn't the voices or the shadows. It was the silence between them, like the walls were waiting, and they knew we were listening. And we weren't sure if we were being watched or if we were the ones being watched. You ever wonder what happens when a secret is too heavy to keep? The walls of SAINT Chinese letter never let it go. They scream in a language no one understands. No one knows what that number meant, or why it was painted there. Some say it was a warning, others say it was a prayer, but the walls don't care for explanations. That keyhole has never been opened, not by investigators, not by the locals, not even by the ghosts who claim to live there. It's as if the building is holding its breath. And here's the thing, no one has ever found the key, not even the people who came to tear the place down. It's just missing, like the secret never existed at all. So now you know, the one detail that has never been explained. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the walls still scream. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what the locals really think? Some say the walls still whisper in the dead of night, and that the screams you hear aren't just echoes of the past. There are whispers that the asylum was built on sacred ground, that the stone itself is cursed. Others say the screams came from the patients who were never properly buried, their souls trapped in the very walls they once called home. Some locals claim the best time to hear the voices is during the full moon, when the air is still and the wind carries a strange, mournful hum. They say it's not the wind, it's something else entirely. But not everyone believes the legends. Some say it's just the wind, or the memory of the past lingering too long. Still, the story is live on, passed down like a secret that can't be forgotten. And so, the asylum stands, a silent witness to the past. You may walk its halls, but you'll never truly walk away the same. They say the walls still whisper, but no one has ever found the source of the sound. Some say it's a voice from the past, others say it's the wind, or maybe the memory of a child who never grew up. The hospital was closed decades ago, but the records never explain what really happened. Was it neglect, or something more sinister? No one knows, not even the people who tried to investigate. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The town has moved on, but the asylum remains. It's a place of ghosts, not just in the stories people tell, but in the way the wind moves through the empty halls and the way the light falls on the cracked floors. And so it remains, a place where the past refuses to be forgotten. Maybe one day someone will find the truth. Until then, the walls keep their secret and the voices keep their song. You've heard the echoes of St. Mary's, but have you ever wondered what the walls remember when the patients are gone? Maybe they hold more than just whispers. Sometimes the silence is louder than the screams. It's in the way the shadows move, or the way the air seems to hold its breath just before the sound comes. But remember, dear listener, the stories are never just about the ghosts. They're about the people who lived, loved, and suffered before us. So as you turn the page, or the dial of your imagination, keep your heart open and your ears wide. And if you ever find yourself in a place that feels too still, too quiet, maybe the walls are just trying to tell you something. You've heard of the haunted places, the ones that whisper secrets through time. But have you ever heard of the Priory of Saint Foy? It's not just a ruin, it's a place that holds the breath of the past. Nestled in the quiet hills of France, this priory once stood as a place of worship and refuge. Now it's overgrown, forgotten, and said to echo with voices that don't belong to the living. Local legends say that if you stand in the courtyard at night, you can hear them muffled voices, murmurs, and the sound of footsteps that never quite reach the ground. It's a place where the past refuses to be buried. But what really haunts the priory is not just the whispers, it's the mystery. Why were the women locked away? Who were they? And what secrets did they carry that the priory would keep so well? This is not just a place. This is a story. And if you're listening, you might just be the one who finally hears the truth that the walls have been trying to tell. You know, the Priory of Saint Foy wasn't always a place of prayer. It started as a humble Benedictine monastery, founded in the 7th century by a wandering monk named Brother Aelric. He had a vision, you see, of a place where the sick could be healed and the poor could find peace. But the monks weren't the only ones drawn to this land. Rumor has it that a local noblewoman, Lady Isolde, took a liking to the place. She built a grand stone keep nearby, believing the priory's blessings would grant her eternal youth. And for a time, they did. The monks tried to pray her out of the land, but the curse took root. The priory became a place of suffering, and the keep became a place of madness. By the time the last monk died, the land was silent except for the whispers that still echo through the stones. And so, the priory fell into ruin. The keep was abandoned, and the land was left to the wilds. But the whispers remained. Some say they come from the stones themselves, a memory of the prayers and the pain that once filled these walls. So when you stand here now, listening to the whispers, remember, it's not just the ghosts you're hearing. It's the echoes of a time when faith, love, and loss were all bound together in the same sacred space. You see it now, don't you? That first flicker of something just off. A shadow where there shouldn't be one. A faint sound, like a breath in the silence of the old stone. It's subtle, really. A whisper, maybe, or just the wind. But the air feels heavier, like the walls are holding their breath. You can almost feel it watching. You start to notice things you didn't before. A door that wasn't there. A sound that echoes from the walls, but doesn't belong to anything in the room. The more you look, the more you realize the place is alive. Not in a way you'd expect, but in a way that makes your skin crawl. It's not the ghosts, it's the walls themselves. And then, just as you think you've got a grip on it, it slips away. Like the walls are testing you. Like they're waiting. Like they're listening. You ever notice how silence can be the most terrible sound? That's what I heard one foggy October night in the Priory of Saint Foy, just the whisper of the wind through ancient stone, and then nothing. I followed the sound deeper into the priory, where the walls seemed to breathe. The silence grew heavier, like the weight of 1,000 unspoken secrets pressing against my ears. I stepped closer, heart pounding, and the voice grew clearer. It was a woman's voice, calm and mournful, as if she had been waiting for me all this time. I turned to leave, but the voice stopped me. "You're not the first to come here," it said, "and you won't be the last." I ran, but the walls still whispered behind me. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the whispers, wondering if the Priory had finally found a new voice to carry its story forward. I've heard from a few people who say they've seen the Priory in the daylight. One woman, a retired teacher, described the stone walls as looking like they were breathing. She said the ivy looked like fingers reaching out, and the air smelled like old books and damp earth. Another man, a former architect, said the building had a kind of memory, like it remembered every stone and every crack. He swore the walls would shift slightly when he looked away, as if they were trying to tell him something. One night, a couple said they heard the sound of a child laughing in the cloister. When they turned, there was no one there. They said the laugh was soft, like a sigh, and it left them with a feeling of being watched. And then there was the gardener, who said he saw a woman in a 16th century dress walking the garden path at dusk. He said she never spoke, just looked at him, and then vanished behind the ivy like she had never been there at all. We started with the old blueprints, folded and yellowed, tucked inside a dusty leather-bound volume. The architect's notes were cryptic, but the layout of the Priory was unmistakable. Each stone had a story, and some stories didn't want to be told. The first thing we noticed was the smell: damp earth, old wood, and something faintly sweet, like the last breath of a lily. It clung to the air, just like the silence between the whispers. One of the monks, a man named Brother Adrian, had left a final entry, his handwriting shaky, as if he were writing in a dream. He wrote about a presence that moves with the wind, not the wind itself. The final clue came from the archive, a map of the Priory's foundations, with markings that didn't match the blueprints. It was as if someone had tried to hide a secret beneath the stones, and the ground itself still remembered. And that's when we heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingers against stone, just outside the archive room. We froze. It wasn't the wind. It was something listening. You see, the one detail that has never been explained is the sound. No one can tell you exactly what it was. Some say it was a child's laughter, others claim it was a woman's weeping. It wasn't a scream, not really. It wasn't a whisper either. It was something in between, like a voice caught in the wind, or a memory that wouldn't let go. What they all agree on, though, is that it stopped the day the last priest left. No one has heard it since, not even the wind. And that, dear friends, is the one detail that has never been explained. The sound, the voice, the mystery, it just stopped, as if it had never been there at all. Some say the whispers come from the nuns who vanished in the 17th century. Others swear they hear the cries of a child who never grew up. But no one has ever found a body, just a lot of dusty cobwebs and the scent of lavender. The locals tell tales of a girl who ran from the Priory, chased by something that wasn't quite human. She was never seen again, but her laughter echoes in the wind on cold winter nights. Theories range from a cursed relic to a family of witches who once lived in secret. One local insists the Priory is a gateway, and the whispers are the walls trying to tell us how to get out. Still, no one dares to stay overnight. The air is too thick, the silence too heavy. You can almost hear the walls breathe, waiting for someone to finally listen. You know, some mysteries aren't just about what happened, but what never did. The Priory of St. Foy still holds its breath, waiting for the truth to surface. They say the walls remember, but what if they're just waiting for someone to listen? The silence here is louder than any scream. The records are missing, the evidence is lost, and the only thing that remains is a lingering question: who was truly behind the last disappearance? And maybe that's the real ghost here, not the one that haunts the halls, but the one that haunts the hearts of those who still search for answers. So the story ends, but the mystery lingers. And you, dear listener, are still here, wondering if you'll ever hear the whisper again. As the firelight dims and the silence deepens, I wonder if the walls of St. Foy still hold their breath, waiting for the right moment to whisper again. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You've heard the echoes of the past, but have you ever wondered if the present is listening back? And as we turn the page, I leave you with this: some stories aren't meant to be closed, they're meant to linger. So, as you settle back into your chair, I ask you, what will you hear when the walls speak next? Until then, stay curious, stay warm, and never let the silence be too long. Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching.